it is an extraordinary organ, isn't it, the brain? And when you consider that, on a naturalist perspective even, inanimate atoms have come to reflect upon themselves, it is an extraordinary thing, consciousness.
Absolutely is.
In that sense, do you feel that there's still an element of mystery there, or are you happy to say, no, I think we really can, ultimately?
I think we really can. It's a puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's what I call the hard question, not the hard problem, but the hard question. The hard question is, and then what happens? That is, all right, you've got this analysis of information coming in from the senses, for instance, and then what happens? There's a whole story to be told about how we use it, how it modifies our beliefs and our emotions and our memories and our personalities and what we say next and what our projects are. And mostly, even scientists have sort of stopped when they've stopped at consciousness as if that was the finish line. No, that's not the finish line. That's only halfway through. And we have to do, and then what happens? And only when we can explain how consciousness not only moves our bodies and gets our lips moving and so forth, but feeds back on itself and permits us to reflect and reflect and reflect and reflect and reflect. And it's only when you've got an account of the actual brain mechanisms that make this incredible reflective capacity available, then you're really beginning to explain consciousness.
Keith, as an idealist then, what's your problem with this particular account of the way that the material brain can quite satisfactorily account for all of our conscious states and that sort of thing?
Well, first of all, to begin with, I absolutely think it's important to take scientific knowledge about the brain and about the world seriously. And I do want to do that. And I agree that a lot of what we're conscious of is caused by the brain. And if something is wrong with your brain, then typically something is wrong with what you understand your consciousness to be. But I think it is a thing in the broadest sense. That is to say, if you made a list of the items that exist in the universe, and you had electrons and quarks and superstrings and whatever, and brains, of course, you would also have to add and consciousness, because I'm not convinced that a study of the brain will ever answer the question how consciousness originates. I don't see how that could be done, because you could say, well, when a brain of some sort is in a certain configuration, then consciousness occurs. That seems to me to be a causal relationship, which is contingent. It could have been different.
Just explain that a bit more. What's the problem with the idea of consciousness arising by a particular, combination of neurochemicals?
Well, because the combination of neurons and chemicals is exactly that, and you could know all about that and not know about there being any consciousness. I mean, I think that's something additional to any physical description of what's happening in my brain.
It sounds a bit like what Keith's describing there, I could be wrong, is something along the lines of the hard problem of consciousness.
It is.
Dan, do you want to explain what that is and what your response to it is, why you don't think it's a problem?
The philosopher David Chalmers dubbed something the hard problem. I don't think there is a hard problem. It's just Chalmers' baptism of this hard problem, which has got people convinced there's a hard problem. When he first introduced it, I said, this is just vitalism reborn. After all, there's the hard problem of whether something's alive. How do we know the ant's alive? You say, well, look at it. Well, that doesn't prove it. It might just be a robot. I mean, maybe it's a zombie ant, or maybe it's not even alive. Now, physicists, biologists, they don't argue about this. The line between living and not living is not an interesting theoretical line. We've learned, well, are proteins alive? Are motor proteins alive, or are they just little robots? Cells are alive. Yeah. How about viruses? Don't ask. We understand that the complexity gradually creates things which are manifestly alive. Amoebas are alive.
And we don't have to create a strict cutoff at which pinpoint life.
And there's no élan vital. There's no extra substance that you have to put in there that distinguishes the living from the unliving, as many people thought. Those were the vitalists. And I think that Chalmers and Keith here on his own expression, they're remaking the vitalist mistake. When I put it to David that that's what it is, he said, no, it isn't. The problems are entirely different. And
well, we don't have David here, but we do have Keith. So, Keith, what do you make of the way that Dan has laid out the hard problem of consciousness there, and for you?
Well, I don't think vitalism is a problem of any sort. I mean, because as far as I can see, to describe a thing as living is to talk about its reproductive capacities and its behavioral capacities, and that's okay. And I think you can have a very shady boundary in deciding whether you call a bacterium alive or not. But consciousness is not like that. It's not a decision about whether to call something conscious or not. It's a real fact. You want to know, do ants have feelings? And a feeling is something that I know. I have feelings. There's no identity between finding blood flow in the brain or electrical activity in the brain and whatever it is that they're enjoying when they enjoy a piece of music.
In that sense, it's a qualitative difference.
It's a qualitative difference. And also one which is, it's not like vitalism, because it's not, in vitalism, there's nothing extra which makes something alive. You describe it by describing the biological facts. But I do think that with consciousness, there is something extra. And there could be a zombie. I mean, there could be a person just like me, but wasn't conscious. And I think it probably could be. Somebody could make one. And you get the same problem with a robot. If you made a robot which you couldn't tell the difference in this famous Turing test, you couldn't tell the difference between it and a human being, there would still be a question which you couldn't resolve. Is it actually having experiences? And you wouldn't be able to answer that question.
And this is a live discussion, obviously, with the advent of artificial intelligence and so on.
It is, yes.